The death of a significant character highlights the central theme of HBO's The Regime, which comes to an unexpected conclusion. Don't Yet Rejoice begins just after the events of The Regime Episode 5, in which Herbert Zubak, the advisor and bodyguard lover of Kate Winslet's character Chancellor Alina Vernham, were forced to escape the palace. They find themselves on their own, pursued by the resistance, and after seeking refuge with an ostensibly helpful local, they are betrayed and given over to the National Freedom Front, which has recently been established. Laskin, the former chief of the security service, is in charge of the NFF. Even if he has joined the opposition, Alina is still necessary to ensure a smooth transition. Reluctantly, Vernham gives in to her adversaries' demands, but American mercenaries come to her aid later and make her an offer. If she returns Alina to power, America will receive preferential trade conditions. Unfortunately for Zubak, they'd also require an execution target to pin Vernham's terrible year on. Alina celebrates her 9th Victory Day and addresses an adoring audience as the regime comes to a close. The highlight of HBO's satire has been the regime's actors, who gave humanity to otherwise quite generic characters. It had heart thanks to the peculiar romance between Vernham and Zubak, but Don't Yet Rejoice shows how the Chancellor's numerous errors have put her in a difficult situation. She continues to enjoy a large following even after starting a civil war and ruining the economy of the regime's unnamed nation. Herbert's killing is intended to serve as a sign that the nation is once again under control and that he is the scapegoat for the Chancellor's disastrous choices. Alina is told that Zubak has to be sacrificed in order for her to survive. Herbert's demise is intended to serve as a stand-in for the Chancellor's disastrous choices and as a statement that the government is back in charge. The regime has given glimpses of Alina's inner self beneath her horrific facade, so her heart bleeds as she chooses to sacrifice Herbert. After spending their final night together, Zubak awakens to find a handgun aimed at his head and a gunshot to his side. It's unclear if the disturbed soldier knew Alina was abandoning him, but his dream in Episode 5 makes it seem like he anticipated she would eventually turn on him. It's difficult to feel too sorry for Zubak, considering his own horrible crimes, but the show makes it clear that the Chancellor will always be troubled by his decision. Alina kept her father Joseph's body on display in the palace's glass casket, as was disclosed in the first episode. This is true even though his body was slowly decomposing, and he had been dead for more than a year. In the third episode of Regime, Alina had experienced dreams in which Joseph criticizes her intelligence and leadership skills. This suggests that there was a very dysfunctional relationship between the Chancellor and Joseph when he was alive, but that she was set free from him when the opposition broke the coffin during their takeover of the palace. In the last scene of The Regime, it is seen that Alina has placed flowers on Joseph's grave in the mausoleum, where Zubak has taken his place. Although Vernham presents a picture of strength and control to the outside world, she still has the same fears and problems as she did a year prior. The HBO miniseries has dealt a lot with dreams and nightmares. In Episode 5, All Ye Faithful, the parrot even goes to dream treatment. Alina will probably be dreaming of Zubak right now, giving expression to her darkest desires and ideas. If the nation finds itself in another chaotic situation caused by the Chancellor in a few years, it wouldn't come as a huge surprise. Following his unsuccessful attempt to pit Zubak and the Chancellor against one another, Laskin takes advantage of Alina's aversion to black mold. She consents to aid the NFF in assuming control, but mercenaries shoot and kill Laskin and his men as they are escorting her out of the building. The country's most successful businessman, Bartos, then whisks Alina and Zubak off to a meeting. He has arranged a meeting with U.S. Senator Holt, who wants to win a political battle while putting an end to the carnage that is engulfing the nation. Though America thinks Vernham still has enough support to hold on to power, the country is on the verge of collapse. In exchange for the reopening of the nation's idle cobalt mines and other advantageous trade conditions, the United States wishes to lend a hand. This likely also means that the country's pointless trade agreement with China will cease immediately. With America utterly unconcerned about Alina's takeover of the Febin Corridor or the thousands of civilian deaths brought on by the Civil War, the regime ends on a somber and cynical note. The Chancellor will not be held accountable for her conduct as long as she is prepared to further the financial goals of those who restored her to office. At the conclusion of the fourth episode of The Regime, Nicky, the devoted husband of the Chancellor, witnessed Zubak and Alina give in to their primal desires. Nicky's abrupt divorce and subsequent departure from the nation had a psychological impact. He still desired her return though, and the epilogue of the regime makes it clear that Nikki and Alina reconciled after she regained her position of authority. The Chancellor cuddles up to her as he gets ready to address the country, inquiring as to what the chaos of the previous year was all about. It was obvious that the Chancellor wasn't completely in love with Nikki, despite her seeming concern for him. Although their marriage is meant to appear stable to the outside world, in reality, they are just roommates. After giving this some thought, Alina can only conclude that she experienced a little wobble. It was obvious that the Chancellor wasn't completely in love with Nikki, despite her seeming concern for him. Although their marriage is meant to appear stable to the outside world, in reality, they are just roommates. For Nikki, this is sufficient as long as he has her back. Don't Get Rejoice by the regime doesn't tell us what happened to Oscar following the rebel raid on the palace. The most endearing character in the regime was Andrea Riseborough's Agnes, the palace manager who stuck by her Chancellor in spite of all the mess she made. That all changed when Agnes's small son Oscar was taken from her by the Chancellor. Agnes was given the opportunity to escape with Oscar as the country collapsed, but the resistance overran the Chancellor's mansion before she could fulfill that dream. Agnes was shot and murdered in the ensuing chaos, while Oscar cowered behind a table in fear. Remarkably, Don't Get Rejoice by the regime never tells us what happened to Oscar. Showrunner Will Tracy said he didn't necessarily have an answer for Oscar's fate in an interview with Decider. Although Tracy stated that he didn't think Oscar was dead, he preferred the viewers to make their own judgment about what happened to him. Their surrogate child is also not mentioned in the closing moments starring Nikki and Alina. Oscar is definitely off her mind now that she's escaped the palace and the Chancellor refuses to turn back for him. In the premiere of the regime, the Chancellor was observing Victory Day. This was the 6th anniversary of saving the country by toppling former Chancellor Keplinger, Hugh Grant. This is all, of course, propaganda. Most of Alina's idiosyncrasies and policies destroyed the country's economy and curtailed civil freedoms. She has been on a crazy trip with Herbert because she wants to be respected and regarded as a strong leader in the world community. Herbert had to be sacrificed, and thousands of people died as a result. In the epilogue of the regime, Alina speaks passionately to a rapt audience who believe all of her falsehoods about how the year of chaos was caused by communists, China, and other parties. Even though Alina is back in power, her supporters are steadfastly devoted, and she has learned nothing from the experience. The finale of the regime should have been easy to predict in a manner. The Chancellor never had to pay for her acts, no matter how terrible or self-serving they were. In Don't Get Rejoice, she loses her position for a short while, but a few days later, she returns to her position as Chancellor. Furthermore, even if she is robbing them and making their lives much more difficult with her schemes, she still enjoys the adoration of a country of fans. Even in the epilogue, when Alina loses something important to her, she doesn't really learn anything from it. Alina's objective is to maintain her position of authority and to always be loved and revered, regardless of the cost to others. Though it may be straightforward, the regime's message that politicians, especially these so-called good ones like Hugh Grant's disastrous Keplinger, are unreliable and authoritarian dictators are evil, is unquestionably timeless.